When we talk about the nerve system, there's traditionally what we refer to as two parts to the nerve system. One is a piece called the sympathetic, and some people would call that the fight or flight system. Think of that as mobilization of your body in terms of a threat. The other part is the parasympathetic system. And that parasympathetic system will do one of a couple things. In terms of threat, usually what we call that response is the freeze response. The second thing that we talk about when it comes to parasympathetics are what we would call a rest and digest system. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. That seems kind of paradoxical that you would either freeze in terms of threat with that system, or you also want that dominant so you can grow. And so that is termed the polyvagal paradox by a gentleman named Stephen Porges. And Porges' theory on polyvagal actually splits those two systems into three systems. He talks about them in terms of the bottom portion of the parasympathetic. So if you use that word para, right, it's outside the sympathetics. And that bottom portion that comes out through your tailbone, he would refer to that as the dorsal vagus or the primitive vagus response. That's the thing that we share with a whole lot of other creatures. And if you think of a mouse that's caught inside of a cat's mouth, then that mouse, in terms of life threat, will go limp. It doesn't play dead. Physiologically, it gives a death response. It goes ahead and poops itself, pees itself, and if the cat is no longer interested in playing with the mouse and leaves the mouse alone, the mouse will recover. Reptiles can do that really well. Reptiles can slow their metabolism down because they're cold-blooded. It doesn't really impact their brain that much. But mammals do suffer consequences if we are in that state for too long. Oxygen deprivation of the brain can be deadly for us. The ventral vagus, or the front part of the vagus, is actually a more evolved system. If you look in order here, the dorsal or that sacral primitive vagus would probably be the ancient vagus, the more evolved one to run away from danger, mobilize the body, take information away from the organs so the arms and legs can work. That sympathetic system would be the next evolutionary. And then what mammals have really developed is this idea of reading our environmental cues and reading our internal cues to determine whether or not our environment is safe or if it's threatening. When that part of the vagus is working well, see, those nerves actually pass from holes in the skull and come down, and they go into other muscles of the throat, of the ears, of the face. They go into the ones that live above the diaphragm, so things like your heart and your lungs. It gets information. It's a sensory nerve that pulls information from all of those parts of your body, and it reads those senses and makes a determination about whether or not what you're seeing in front of you is okay, and then it puts color to that sympathetic and to that older parasympathetic system. I want to give you an example. So let's say you see two puppies that are chasing each other, and one puppy nips the other puppy on the tail. So the first puppy, whose tail just got nipped, will turn to the other puppy and it'll look and it'll listen. It will make a decision about whether the puppy that just nipped him has a growly puppy face on, and then it will engage the sympathetics, a fight or flight response. Or if the puppy has a play puppy face on, then it's reading that environment as, oh, this was the act of play, and play will continue. So if the social vagus is doing its job, if it's coloring your world as being friendly, then it will engage those sympathetics, not as fight or flight, but it'll engage it as play. That's what we see kids do. The other situation, I mentioned the mouse inside the cat's mouth. That feature, that immobilization or isolation feature, is something that triggers that sense of I'm trying to mobilize, and I can't, so now I need to do death feigning. I need to have my body pretend it's dead in order to survive this experience. Humans will do that in times of extreme stress, and we'll do something called dissociation, where we completely shut our mind off and just let our body survive the experience and then come back to it. And so when we talk in terms of that experience, right, that isolation or mobilization, but we engage the social vagus with it, I want you to think about an experience you might have been lucky enough to have where you're new in love and you're maybe in a very busy party and it's just you and that future partner, that heart song, that twin flame, and you are just just engage. Everything melts away. Time seems to have a warp to it that just, you can't believe how long you've been spending with each other, even though it only seems like 5 minutes, but like everybody else is gone, right? And that isolation, that immobilization, that's intimacy. You think about a baby that's inside its mother's arms when it's nursing, and they've just got their eyes locked to each other, and that baby's immobilized technically. That baby cannot get away, but it is an intimate bond between mother and child. That social vagus is super important. We have a term that we call our intuition, right? Listening to your gut sense. And so when we talk about that intuition, there's actually a neurological component to that. We call it neuroception. And so if we're talking about nerve system dysfunction, that is an actual sense. If that actual sense has dysfunction in it, then we aren't able to accurately read our environment, and it might get us into trouble sometimes. And so when we're talking about ways that we can measure it, one of the ways we do that is with something called heart rate variability. So we used to think that the heart would beat very steady like a drum, and that was a good thing. But it turns out through research through Institute of Heart Math that turns out to be a sign that your body may begin to break down, with one clear exception, and that's pregnancy. So when we're looking at whether or not you have a adaptability to your environment, what we want to see is a balancing act between the social vagus influence over the heart and the sympathetic influence over the heart. And if you're able to exercise and play and then recover well, then what we have built inside of you is a concept of resilience. And that is really key to understanding the big picture of chiropractic. My job with your nerve system is really to help you become as adaptable and resilient to your environment as possible, so that we can all go through things like I talked about earlier, the trauma of Hurricane Ian, and we can perceive that event not as a traumatic event, but as an obstacle that we can make ourselves better through. It's a challenge that will help us grow. The ability to do that has everything to do with that resilience inside of your system, and it's why I take polyvagal theory so seriously as a chiropractor.